Assalamu alaikum and welcome to a new video where we are going to talk about inks. Someone asked on the channel about this matter and today we are going to look thoroughly into it. Now, for a start, for those of you who are slightly interested in the topic, a quick answer to this question would be don't use fountain pen inks for dip pen inks, basically. That's the first thing. The second thing would be also don't use the acrylic ones or the pigment based ones or the Chinese ones, because those are made for things different than calligraphy pens such as this one, the dip pens that we use for Arabic calligraphy. So those types avoid. With regards to the ones that you're going to use, depend on the color you're going to use. If you were to use black color in your pieces, then you have options such as the Arabian ink, but that depends on the manufacturer. Or you could find a Sumi ink like this one. This would be great for black scripts. Or you could find others that are made for calligraphy like the Isomars, or you could find some Newton ones that are Newton. It's a calligraphy ink basically. So find those for black scripts. If you wanted to write something in colors, Isomar, the Sumi ink won't work for you because that comes only in black. So you will go back to the calligraphy inks and choose a color. Like for example, here I've got Isomar's brown, and there's another one that is blue right over here. So those are the general notes about this. Don't use the fountain pen ink like Schaefer, for example. It's perfect for other applications, but not for the calligraphy thing that we do. And avoid the pigment inks. Stick to the calligraphy ones that I just mentioned. This is a quick answer for those of you who don't want to go through the details of it. Now, for those of you who want to know more about it, we have several factors that affects our choice of ink, and that would go down to the 5 main factors that we sort of deal with in Arabic calligraphy. The first one is the ink itself. This is the main factor. The second factor would be the paper we use, and yes, it sort of relates to that in a way or another. The third would be the pen that we use. The fourth is the script that we're going to write with, because believe it or not, depending on the script, some inks work better than the other. The last one, in my opinion, would be the surface under the paper, sorry about that. So when you write, does this paper you have has something underneath it that helps the flow of the ink and the sort of the movement of the pen. So these are the main 5 factors, in my opinion, that affect your choice of ink, basically. Let's start with the first one, the ink. And for this one, we will discuss several aspects of it. So for ink, you have 3 main categories, in my opinion. You're either using black ink, or you want a colored one, or you want to use a metallic one. So for each one of those, you're gonna kind of shift between inks. If we were to take the black one, for example, for black ink, your first choice, in my opinion, would be the Arabian ink. If you were able to find a good manufacturer of this one, now usually it doesn't sort of come from big manufacturers. It's something that you have to look in your country and see if there's a calligrapher or an ink maker locally. That would be the first option you would go for. Why? Because the Arabian ink that is handmade it's basically made for Arabic calligraphy. So the consistency of it, the color that it gives you, it's just different. You will never find something like it made by big manufacturers. If you couldn't find that, your second option would be the Sumi ink, in my opinion. Now, Sumi is a sort of drawing ink that is made by Daiso, and they make this really fine black ink, and it is cheap in some countries, in some areas, but it could be really expensive in other places. So double check. If it was too expensive for you, it's fine, don't go for it. It's just something of a, let's say, final touch. Is something that gives you perfection in a way or another. It's really helpful and really good when you practice with it and you do designs with it. It's really nice, and we're going to look into so we're going to work with it in a bit, and that's the one that I use usually in my videos. So Sumi ink, if you couldn't find Arabian ink. Now if you couldn't find either of them and you still want a calligraphy ink, you should look into any type that has calligraphy written on it. So for example, we've got the isomers that I just showed you, and there are other types that you will find out there that are, in my opinion, better than the isomers, because that's another thing about calligraphy inks. You kind of have this option of the consistency. So for example, Winsor & Newton, they make really thick inks. And for Winsor & Newton, you will find these ones. This is the shape of it. I don't have a bottle, so I just downloaded a picture so that you could see it. So they do have lovely colors with regards to the ink they produce. And it's a really good quality, in my opinion. I've used it a lot. You might want to dilute it with water before using it, but on the whole, it's a really good, let's say, calligraphy ink. The other one would be the Schminke. Now, if you were able to find Schminke, again, personal opinion, that would be the best. Just go for it. It's even better than the Sumi ink in a way or another. So it's made in Germany. It's a really good ink, and the colors that they make are really vibrant. There is something about it that when you write with it, you don't end up with drops of ink at the end of the letter you write. So this should be your option. Anyway, any type of ink that you will find that has a description of calligraphy ink, that would be made specifically for calligraphy. So go for that. This is with regards to the black ink. You could either go for the Arabian one if you found it, a Sumi one if it was like available and cheap where you live, or you could look for other types that are made for calligraphy. Now, if we took the colored one, the same story. Sumi will be sort of taken out of the equation because they only produced black one, to my knowledge. You would go back to the Schminke, Winsor & Newton, or the isomers. Each one of those is really good. You might want to dilute some of them with water. It depends on your use and your personal preference with regards to this matter. Metallic inks, on the other hand, those ones are really tricky because each manufacturer seems to have the way of making it, and I've tried it and it's really different from one manufacturer to the other. The best type that I've ever tried was made by a calligrapher in Jordan. His name is Ustad Yaqub Abu Shawriya, and he makes this really good metallic ink. He doesn't give out the secrets on how to make it, but the quality of that ink is just beyond belief. I mean, because he's a calligrapher and he makes it to the level that you would simply write with it and you will not find something better than it. Gonna be straightforward with you. So, depending on the color that you're gonna use, black, metallic, or sort of colored, this sort of limits your options with regards to the inks. The first point out of the way, what types of inks are out there? All of them you could use except for the ones that are not made for calligraphy. As we said, the fountain pen ink. For example, here I'm using a fountain pen and it works perfectly with the Schaefer. That's why I bought the Schaefer bottle, because I want to fill this pen with it. But I don't use it with calligraphy. I basically use it for this pen. It gives you really smooth writing, so if you wrote really quickly with a pen, it still writes. If you were to fill this pen with Sumi ink or any other type of ink, it will not work as good as that one. That's why it's so sort of liquidy, and when you write with it, as we're going to see, it does not work, basically. This is with regards to the ink, so we got that out of the way. Second, we're going to look into the paper. So, types of paper, you will have, they will start from the treated ones. So for example here, I've got two papers. So this is treated, muqahhar, as you can see there's a shine to it. And this is also treated, but it's not fully treated. Like there's some shine, but it's not, it has only one layer of egg on it. Because when you treat it, we're going to look into this later, when you treat a paper you use egg white, and you do it on several steps, and you have to burnish it for it to be really smooth and mirror-like or glossy. So this is the first type, the treated paper, and that one will limit your choice of inks. So you have to try the ink on the paper and see if it works or not. So for example here I've got a couple of strokes on each one of them. Now I want you to focus on these two. You see up here, you see how when you reflect light on them, they sort of shine, except for the black one. The black one is the Arabian ink. And that is something unique to manufacturing Arabian ink. As you can see here, they disappear. The black ink that was made in accordance with the original way of making ink, and that's actually the one that we made in a video several months ago. It does not light when you reflect light to it. So that's a plus, that's a huge plus for the Arabian ink. So the paper, treated one, either fully or half, like depending on, because this is like they use it for decoration and that sort of stuff. The other type would be the glossy one that I use to sort of show you and to make the classes with, and that is basically my choice for practice and for the sort of making small pieces. It's really good. It resembles the idea of working with a treated type of paper, but you don't have to go and buy that one because it might be unavailable or be really expensive to waste on practice. Although you should always have your stack of treated paper. Then we've got the normal paper, which is just basically this paper that you find everywhere. And you've got types of paper that are colored, for example black and other colors that come really rough, and the ones that you use for metallic pens. So as you can see, if you were to go for a black paper or a colored paper, or you want to use metallic ink, it will not work with glossy paper because metallic is shiny, and if you used it with shiny paper, it will not give you that contrast, number one. Number two, it will not stick to the paper because it's made in a different way than the other types. So if you were to actually try and write with every type of them, which is what we are going to do now. So here I've got this shaver, and I'm going to use it straight from the bottle so that I would take more than enough just to show you what I mean by not using it with dip pens. So here, if I drew a line, you will find that it's really light. It's basically grey. There's nothing wrong with the ink. It's basically made for fountain pens, not for dip pens. So that's something we usually use or misunderstand with regards to the types of inks. This is the shaver. The shaver, don't use it. If we were to try, let's leave the Sumi ink aside a bit. Let's try the Arabian one. Now this is the one that we made on the channel for you a while ago, like a few months ago. And for this one, it will not be smooth because again, it needs mixing. And I actually ran out because I got a really small amount of it. But again, you will see that it will give you darkness, and when it dries, it gives you this perfect dark matter. As you can see, I'm not using it from the bottle, I'm using it from an inkwell with a thread in it, and it's already given me a darker color than the shaver. But again, it's the quality of the ink. Now this ink I made quickly, so it's not as dark as it should be. But when it dries, it will turn into this matte color, Now, if we tried the Sumi, right over here, which is the one that I use for the classes, you will see that although the pen is big, the Sumi gives you this really consistent darkness, and it gives you long strokes. So there is a big difference in all of them. So it's not about is it a good ink or a bad ink, it's about are you using it for the right application, basically. And if we moved on to, let's say, the isomers for a colored feeling of an ink. Again, calligraphy inks, when you start writing with them, they might give you a different stroke to where you finish. So you have to keep that in mind when writing. Now, if I were to use Schaefer blue ink, it will not give me these strokes. It will give me consistent light stroke, just like the black one. So here, you can see the isomers. Winsor & Newton will give you darker sort of strokes, and Shemenka will give you consistent color. It rarely gives you this change of color because basically the texture of the ink is really good, that it flows perfectly. That's why I just advise you to go for that if you had the chance to find it, or if it was available. Finally, we're going to look into the metallic ones, and this one has been sitting around for a while, so I don't expect it to work anyway. So metallic ink has this pigment side to them, and when you write with them, you have to be patient. This could use some water in it, but yeah. Anyway, as you can see here, I'm using it on white paper, so it will not show reflection properly. But if it were to be used on black paper, it will give you a better sort of idea about it. So this is with regards to the different inks. Now, if I were to change this paper and use the ink on a normal paper, the one that we usually find in our house, like an A4, the one that we print on. If I were to use the Schaefer one on this paper, it will give me, the edges here will not be sharp. Now this might not show on the camera, but in real life, when you use these types of inks, you will find that the edges on this paper are not good. They need to be, and that's why we avoid using normal paper. And meanwhile, if I use the Sumi ink, it will give me better edges, give me sharper lines to the sides. But again, you see how it cuts because the paper is rough, and the what do you call it? The fountain pen ink is more liquid, so it gives you these nice endings to a stroke. Meanwhile, the thicker the ink, the less friendly it would be on normal paper. And if we were to try it with the isomers, which is let's say heavier than the Sumi ink, we will find that it will be even harder to write with. So you start with a stroke, and yeah, the same story. It stops. So you're going to have to work around with small strokes. This is with regards to the paper. Several types of them. You have to think, what am I going to use? What the type of the paper? Oh, I'm going to use dark paper. Then am I going to use metallic ink? That will change the, let's say, the route you're going to take and the type of ink that you're going to work with. The second note would be the pen. That's going to be a short talk. So as you can see, you have several types of pens out there, dip pens or the ones that you refill. For refillables, you have to stick to the manufacturer ink to give you the best flow in the pen. If you're going to use the refill the refillable pen with as a dip pen, then you have more freedom with regards to that. But again, it's something out of practice that you can sort of make out with. Next point would be the script. So as you can see, the scripts sort of governs you with the strokes that you have. For example, if you were to write thuluth, you need an ink that is light and gives you long strokes, because you have an alif, it needs to be really long. Meanwhile, if you were to write nasikh, you need something that is thin and light, so that the small, because nasikh usually is written with 1.5 millimeter, 1 millimeter pens. So if you use the very liquidy, very thick ink, it will give you heavy feeling of the script. So that is more detailed, that is more advanced level than we should talk about right now. We might talk about it in the future. So that's where the script comes in with regards to the inks. And finally, the surface beneath. So we've covered the ink, the paper, the pen, the script. The surface is what you have beneath the paper. So if I were to write on this paper without anything beneath it, the ink will not work with me. It will either flow too quickly, flow too slowly, and I will struggle trying to write. But what you should do is you should always put something under your paper. If you had a stack of papers, do it, like here, I've done that. Or you could try, if you have a mouse pad, because this is a mouse pad basically. If you had a mouse pad, try and put a paper on it and write. And see the huge difference it makes when you have a lining or a surface that the paper sits on. So what should you put the paper on to have a better feeling of the ink or the script itself? Try putting paper under the main paper you have. A better option would be to go for something softer, which could be the mouse pad that I just showed you, or you could go for those packaging materials that you find when you buy an electronic device. So if you, I don't know the name of it, if you bought a laptop, or you could find it anywhere, it's a very thin sheet of foam. It's like 1 millimeter thick or 2 millimeter thick. It gives you the same effect of a mouse pad. And that one, if you put it under the paper, the ink will flow perfectly and you will get the full control over the paper, over the pen and the ink. So here, as we saw, it's not just the ink that we have. We saw the different types. You've got, for black ones, you've got the Sumi, or you could go for a more traditional one, the Arabian ink that we just saw. You could use the Isomars, Winsor & Newton, Schminke. There are other types out there that you could look into, but they have to say calligraphy for them. Avoid using fountain pen inks if you are going to use it as a dip pen. And that is basically with regards to inks. So you have to try it yourself, and if you had a specific problem with regards to inks, feel free to comment down below so that we could work it out and figure out why that type of ink isn't working for you. I hope this was informative and beneficial for all of you. I might actually lastly share with you again the mattness and the non-reflecting feature of the Arabian ink. So as you can see here, it reflects basically of all types. So here we've got the Isomars and the Sumi. Once we go to the Arabian ink, it's just pitch black. Finally, we've got the fountain pen, that one that you shouldn't be using. So yeah, I hope this was a beneficial video for all of you out there. This has been Ammar Awaudi. Like, share and subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more about Arabic calligraphy and what relates to it. And have a lovely day, evening or night. Goodbye.